Welcome to African Folktales by Tammy. Please don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe for more interesting stories. Also share this story to someone who might be interested. Let's get into the story. Lucy Obi stood by the kitchen sink, staring out the small window as the sun cast its golden glow over the quiet streets of Udolu Estate. She watched a young mother across the road struggling with a toddler who refused to let go of her skirt. The woman laughed, playfully lifting the child into her arms as he giggled, his tiny hands reaching for her face. A dull ache settled in Lucy's chest. She turned back to the dishes, scrubbing them absent-mindedly. It had been 6 years. 6 long years of marriage, yet her home remained silent, void of the laughter and cries that filled her dreams. Henry never said it outright, but she could sense his growing impatience. The way he barely touched her anymore. The way he sighed whenever she mentioned visiting another doctor. The clatter of a plate startled her. She had been gripping it too hard. With a sigh, she rinsed it off and placed it on the rack. Henry would be home soon, and she had to make sure everything was in order. Her phone buzzed on the counter. Rachel. A tired smile crossed Lucy's lips as she picked up the call. "Hey, Rach. Hey, love. How are you feeling today?" Rachel's voice was as warm as ever, laced with concern. Lucy hesitated before responding. "I'm okay. Just a bit tired." "Tired," Rachel scoffed. "That man has you doing too much." "You're not his maid, Lucy," Lucy chuckled softly. "Come on, Rach, he works hard. The least I can do is make sure he comes home to a clean house and a warm meal." There was a brief pause. "If you say so." Rachel had always been protective of her. They had been best friends since university, inseparable even after Lucy married Henry and moved to Udolu Estate. It was Rachel who held her hand through the agonizing fertility tests. Rachel who wiped her tears when Henry started staying out late. Rachel who always reassured her that she was enough. "Have you eaten?" Rachel's voice pulled Lucy back to the conversation. "I will once I'm done here," Lucy replied, glancing at the half-prepared meal on the stove. Rachel sighed. "I swear you work harder than someone who earns a salary. Come over tomorrow, okay? We'll have lunch just as girls." Lucy smiled. "That sounds nice." They talked for a few more minutes before Rachel ended the call, reminding her, as always, that she deserved happiness too. Lucy exhaled deeply, her chest tightening with emotions she couldn't quite place. She had been feeling this way more often lately, lost in thoughts she couldn't fully grasp. The front door creaked open and she straightened, wiping her hands on her apron before stepping into the living room. Henry stood at the entrance, his tie loosened, his face drawn. He barely looked at her as he shut the door and tossed his keys onto the side table. "You're home early," she said gently. He grunted, walking past her to the couch. Traffic wasn't bad today. Lucy studied him carefully. The man who once greeted her with warm kisses now barely acknowledged her presence. She had memorized the lines of his face, the way his brows creased when he was annoyed, the way his lips tightened when he was trying to suppress irritation. She wanted to ask how his day was. She wanted to sit beside him, rest her head on his shoulder like she used to. But something in his posture made her hesitate. Instead, she cleared her throat. "Dinner will be ready soon." He nodded absent-mindedly, already scrolling through his phone. Lucy swallowed the lump in her throat and turned away. Later, as they sat at the dining table, the silence between them was suffocating. She filled his plate, hoping he would at least acknowledge the effort she had put into making his favorite meal, ofada rice and ayamais sauce. But he ate mechanically, never looking up, never speaking. The air felt thick with unspoken words. Lucy pushed her food around her plate. "Henry, is something wrong?" He didn't respond at first, only pausing to sip his water. When he finally spoke, his tone was clipped. "Nothing's wrong, Lucy. Not everything is about you." The words stung more than she expected. She lowered her gaze, forcing herself to stay calm. "I didn't mean it that way. I just drop it," he interrupted, standing up abruptly. He grabbed his phone and walked toward the bedroom without another word. Lucy sat frozen, her appetite gone. The man she married, the man she loved so deeply, was slipping away from her, and she didn't know how to stop it. Lucy sat on the edge of the bed, her hands folded in her lap as she listened to the sound of the shower running. Henry had barely spoken to her that morning. He had woken up early, dressed in silence, and walked past her as if she were invisible. She wanted to ask if she had done something wrong, but the words remained lodged in her throat, heavy and unwelcome. She had long stopped expecting morning kisses or soft whispers of "have a good day" as he left for work. These days, the air between them was thick with something she couldn't name: resentment, disappointment, or perhaps something far worse. She stood smoothing down the creases of her nightgown and walked to the dressing table. Her reflection stared back at her, a woman with tired eyes and a face that once held so much joy. She reached for her brush, running it through her thick dark curls as a sigh escaped her lips. The sound of the bathroom door opening made her tense. Henry emerged, rubbing a towel over his damp hair, his gaze never meeting hers. He moved around the room with indifference, dressing quickly as if being in the same space with her was suffocating. She tried one last time. "Henry," she called softly. He didn't stop, only letting out a distracted hum as he buttoned his shirt. She swallowed. "Is there something I should know? You've been distant. If there's something on your mind, please talk to me." He finally met her gaze, but there was no warmth in his eyes. "Not everything is about you, Lucy," he said, grabbing his wristwatch from the bedside table. "I have work to do. Not everyone has the luxury of sitting at home all day doing nothing." The words landed like a slap, but she masked the hurt, gripping the edge of the table to steady herself. He didn't wait for a response. The next sound she heard was the front door slamming shut. She sat back down, staring at the floor, numb. The afternoon sun cast a golden glow over Madiba Cafe, where Lucy sat across from Rachel, stirring her iced tea with a straw. The cafe was their usual spot, a place where they had shared countless laughs over the years. But today Lucy wasn't laughing. Rachel watched her closely, her red-polished nails tapping against the rim of her coffee cup. "He said that to you? Just like that?" Lucy nodded, her fingers tightening around the glass. "I don't know what's happening to him, Rach. It's like I'm suddenly a burden, like he resents me." Rachel let out a slow breath, shaking her head. "You see why I keep telling you to get a job? At least something small. When men feel like they're carrying all the weight, they start acting up." Lucy frowned. "But I do everything at home. I cook, I clean, "That's not the same thing," Rachel interrupted, her voice gentle but firm. "You're relying on him for everything, Lucy. You don't have your own money, and he knows it. That's why he feels like he can talk to you however he likes." Lucy lowered her gaze. Deep down she knew Ray wasn't wrong. Rachel leaned forward, placing a hand over hers. "I hate to say this, but if this keeps going, one day he might just wake up and leave. And if that happens, where will that leave you?" Lucy's heart clenched. The thought of losing Henry was terrifying, but even more terrifying was the reality of being stranded penniless with nowhere to go. "I don't know what to do," she admitted. Rachel squeezed her hand. "You have me. You're not alone, okay?" Lucy gave a small nod, her lips pressing into a weak smile. She was grateful for Rachel, always the one to lift her up when she felt like she was drowning. But even as Rachel smiled back at her, a flicker of something unreadable passed through her eyes. It was gone just as quickly as it appeared. Lucy spent the evening preparing Henry's favorite meal, hoping to bridge the distance between them. The aroma of jollof rice and grilled chicken filled the air, a comforting scent that reminded her of better days. She set the table carefully, adjusting the candles, making sure everything was perfect. When Henry walked in, she met him at the door with a small smile. "I made dinner." He barely looked at the table before sighing. "I already ate," Lucy blinked. "Oh, I didn't know," he shrugged, loosening his tie. "Didn't think I needed to inform you of everything." The weight in her chest grew heavier. She took a shaky breath. "I just wanted us to eat together." "It's been a while." Henry let out a dry laugh, finally meeting her gaze. "Eat together? So you can sit there looking at me like a lost puppy while I try to enjoy my meal?" Lucy flinched. "Why are you being like this?" "I'm tired, Lucy, tired of coming home to the same thing every day. You waiting around like you have nothing better to do. It's suffocating." Her throat tightened, but she forced herself to stay calm. "I can get a job if that's what you want." "I can," Henry shook his head. "It's not about that. It's just," he exhaled sharply, "forget it." He turned, heading toward the bedroom, leaving Lucy standing in the dimly lit dining room, surrounded by untouched food and the bitter taste of rejection. She sank into a chair, rubbing her hands over her face. She didn't know what was happening to her marriage, but for the first time she was beginning to fear that no amount of effort would be enough to fix it. Lucy sat on the balcony, her eyes tracing the outline of the fading evening sun over Aguta Crescent. A soft breeze brushed against her skin, but there was no comfort in it. Her thoughts were heavy, swirling like the dark clouds forming the distance. The house behind her was eerily quiet. Henry hadn't come home yet. Lately his late nights had become more frequent, and she had stopped asking where he was. Every time she tried, it ended with him snapping at her as though her mere existence irritated him. She had always believed that love could withstand anything, that patience and devotion could mend the cracks in any marriage. But what happened when those cracks turned into gaping wounds? When the person you loved began looking at you as if you were nothing but an obligation? A knock at the gate startled her. She glanced at the time, past 8 p.m. Her heart lifted slightly. Maybe Henry was back. Maybe tonight would be different. She hurried down the steps and opened the gate, only to find Rachel standing there, a concerned look on her face. "You haven't been answering my calls," Rachel said, stepping inside. Lucy forced a small smile. "I've just been tired." Rachel studied her, then sighed. "Come here." Lucy hesitated before stepping into Rachel's embrace. It was warm, reassuring. For a moment she allowed herself to relax, to pretend that everything was fine. Rachel pulled away and cupped Lucy's face. "You look exhausted." "Have you been sleeping?" Lucy shook her head. "Not really," Rachel exhaled, guiding her to the couch. "This isn't good, Lou. You're disappearing into this marriage, and I hate seeing you like this." Lucy's gaze dropped to her lap. "What else can I do? I can't force him to love me again." Rachel's lips pressed into a thin line. "Maybe it's time to stop trying. Maybe it's time to think about yourself for once." Lucy frowned. "I can't just walk away." Rachel took her hands. "I know. But you can prepare for the worst. Have you thought about opening a small account for yourself? Just something in case things don't get better?" Lucy's stomach tightened. "Rachel, I don't. I'm not saying leave him now," Rachel cut in. "But you need to protect yourself, Lou. You don't know what he's thinking, and you can't let yourself be left with nothing." The words settled deep in Lucy's mind, but she remained quiet. Rachel sighed. "I'm just worried about you." Lucy offered a weak smile. "I know." Rachel stayed for a while longer, chatting about work and her latest shopping finds, trying to lighten the mood. Eventually she left and Lucy was alone again. The emptiness of the house felt suffocating. Henry stumbled in past midnight, his shirt slightly wrinkled, his tie missing. Lucy, who had dozed off on the couch, woke to the sound of the door shutting. She sat up quickly. "You're late." He didn't even glance at her as he tossed his phone onto the table. "I had a long day." Lucy swallowed the lump in her throat. "Did you eat? I'm not hungry." He started walking toward the bedroom, but something inside Lucy snapped. "Henry." He stopped but didn't turn around. She rose to her feet. "Talk to me." His shoulders tensed. "About what?" She hesitated. "Us." A humorless chuckle escaped him. "There is no us, Lucy. Just you sitting here waiting for a man who doesn't want to be waited for." Her breath hitched. "Why are you saying this?" He turned to face her then, his eyes cold, unfamiliar. "Because it's the truth." Tears burned the back of her throat, but she refused to let them fall. "If I'm such a burden to you, why did you marry me?" Henry sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. "I don't have the energy for this." He walked away, and Lucy stood there frozen, shattered by the weight of his words. Days turned into weeks, and nothing changed. If anything, Henry became worse. He stopped acknowledging her entirely, as though she were nothing more than furniture in the house. He would leave in the morning, return late at night, and barely touch the food she prepared. The silence between them was louder than any argument they had ever had. Lucy found solace in Rachel's company, but even then an unsettling feeling lingered in her heart. One afternoon, as she sat in Rachel's living room, sipping a cup of hibiscus tea, she sighed. "I don't know how much more I can take." Rachel leaned back in her chair, studying her. "Then maybe it's time to let go." Lucy looked at her, startled. Rachel reached for her hand. I know it's hard, but do you really want to keep living like this? Do you want to wake up every day feeling like a stranger in your own home? Lucy bit her lip. I don't know. Rachel squeezed her hand. Then maybe it's time to start figuring it out. Lucy exhaled, staring at the tea in her cup. The truth was, she didn't know what scared her more, leaving Henry or holding on to something that no longer existed. But for the first time, she began to wonder if staying was truly worth it. The air inside the house felt different. There was an unsettling stillness, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath, waiting. Lucy moved through the living room, her bare feet soundless against the cold tile floor. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, marking time that felt both too fast and too slow. Henry had not come home the previous night. It wasn't the first time, and she had long stopped staying up, waiting for the sound of his keys in the lock. She wanted to be angry, wanted to demand answers, but exhaustion weighed her down like an anchor. She found herself in the kitchen, mechanically filling the kettle with water. Her hands trembled slightly as she set it on the stove. A part of her wanted to believe that if she just kept moving, kept functioning, everything would eventually fix itself. But deep down she knew better. A sharp knock at the door broke the silence. She hesitated before moving to open it. Rachel stood there, sunglasses perched atop her head, her lips painted a shade too bold for a casual visit. "Morning, Lou," she said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. Lucy shut the door behind her, rubbing her arms. "You're out early," Rachel shrugged, glancing around. "I was in the neighborhood. Thought I'd check in on you." Lucy forced a smile, but Rachel's eyes were sharp, scanning her as though searching for something hidden beneath the surface. "Have you eaten?" Rachel asked, moving toward the kitchen. Lucy shook her head. "I was just about to make tea." Rachel opened the cupboard, pulling out a mug. "Let me do it." Lucy watched her move around, too familiar with her space, too comfortable. Something about the way Rachel moved unsettled her, but she pushed the feeling aside. Maybe she was just being overly sensitive. "Have you spoken to Henry?" Rachel asked, her voice too casual. Lucy hesitated. "Not since yesterday morning." Rachel's fingers tightened around the mug for the briefest moment before she turned, her expression neutral. "That's not right, Lucy. He shouldn't treat you like this." Lucy lowered her gaze. "I don't know what to do anymore." Rachel exhaled dramatically. "You deserve better. You know that, right?" Lucy nodded, but the words felt hollow. Rachel leaned against the counter, stirring sugar into her tea. "I hate seeing you like this, stuck, waiting for a man who doesn't appreciate you." Lucy seethed. I keep thinking, what if I leave and regret it? What if you stay and regret that instead?" Rachel interrupted. The words settled deep in Lucy's mind. Rachel reached for her hand, squeezing it. "I just want you to be happy, Lou." Lucy swallowed, forcing a nod. "I know." The sound of the front door opening made them both turn. Henry stepped inside, his expression unreadable. He barely acknowledged Rachel, his eyes settling on Lucy with the same distant indifference he had perfected over the months. Rachel stepped back, giving them space, but Lucy could feel her presence lingering, watching. "You didn't come home," Lucy said softly, searching his face for any sign of regret. Henry let out a tired sigh, rubbing his temples. "I was busy, too busy to call." He didn't answer. Instead, he moved past her, heading for the bedroom. Rachel touched Lucy's arm lightly. "I should go," Lucy nodded, her throat tight as she walked Rachel to the door. Before leaving, Rachel leaned in and whispered, "Think about what I said." Lucy shut the door, leaning against it. She had been thinking about it, but the thought of leaving still felt impossible. A week passed. Henry had grown colder, his words sharper, his presence more like a shadow than a husband. He spoke to her only when necessary, each conversation laced with unspoken resentment. One afternoon, while gathering laundry from the bedroom, Lucy noticed something odd. A small stack of documents lay on Henry's bedside table. She hesitated before picking them up, her eyes scanning the contents. Her breath hitched. Divorce papers. Her name was printed neatly, as though it had always been meant to be there. The papers had been prepared but not yet signed. Her hands trembled as she set them down, her heartbeat thundering in her ears. She felt the weight of realization pressing down on her. This wasn't something Henry had just thought about. This had been planned. Her fingers curled into fists. For the first time in months, she felt something other than sadness. She felt anger. And she wanted to know exactly who had put the idea into his head. Lucy sat by the bedroom window, her hands clenched in her lap, her thoughts a chaotic storm. The divorce papers had been sitting there waiting. Silent proof that Henry had made up his mind long before she even sensed the end was coming. A lump rose in her throat, but she swallowed it down. Crying wouldn't change anything. It wouldn't stop whatever had already been set in motion. She needed answers. For months, she had convinced herself that Henry's coldness was just a phase, something that would pass like an unpredictable storm. But now, the evidence was right there in front of her. This wasn't temporary. This was deliberate. Lucy wiped her palms on her dress, forcing herself to stand. The room felt suffocating, as though walls were closing in on her. She needed fresh air, needed to think. As she stepped out onto the front porch, the streets of Udolu Estate buzzed with life. Children played in the distance, their laughter contrasting sharply with the emptiness she felt inside. She walked without direction, her feet leading her down familiar paths. She barely noticed when she reached the Haven Lounge, one of the more discreet bars in the area. The place was known for its quiet atmosphere, a hideaway for those who wanted to drink without drawing attention. Lucy wasn't sure why she stopped, but something in her gut told her to go in. Pushing the door open, she was greeted by the low hum of conversation and the scent of aged whiskey. She moved carefully, her eyes scanning the dimly lit space. And then she saw them, Henry Rachel, sitting in a corner booth, their heads tilted toward each other in quiet conversation. Lucy felt the world slow around her. Her breath hitched as she took in the sight before her. Henry's arm resting lazily on the table, his fingers grazing Rachel's wrist in a touch that was too familiar, too comfortable. Rachel leaning in slightly, her lips curved into a knowing smile. Lucy's chest tightened. For a moment she couldn't move, couldn't breathe. She had imagined many reasons for Henry's growing hatred, his frustrations, his work, their childless marriage. But not this, never this, her best friend. The one person she trusted with her secrets. The woman who held her hand when she cried. The same woman who had told her, time and time again, that she deserved better. Bile rose in her throat, but she forced herself to swallow it down. She couldn't fall apart here. Not yet. Instead, she stepped back, careful not to make a sound, and slipped out of the bar unnoticed. Her hands trembled as she walked away, her pulse pounding in her ears. She needed time to process this. She needed to understand how long this had been happening right under her nose. And most importantly, she needed to figure out what to do next. That night, Lucy lay awake in bed staring at the ceiling. Henry had come home late as usual. The scent of alcohol clung to him, but she didn't ask questions. She didn't say a word. She was no longer the clueless wife waiting for answers. She had them now, but she wasn't going to react on impulse. No, she was going to be smart. If Henry and Rachel thought they could manipulate her, humiliate her, discard her like an afterthought, they were wrong. They had underestimated her, and soon they would regret it. Lucy sat at the long dining table, her eyes scanning the faces of the people who once felt like family. The air was thick with the aroma of freshly cooked jollof rice, fried plantains, and sizzling peppered fish. Laughter and clinking glasses filled the room, but Lucy was drowning in her own thoughts. She glanced at Henry, who sat beside her, acting like nothing was wrong. Across from her, Rachel wore that same fake smile, the one she had perfected over the years. The audacity, the absolute shamelessness. Lucy inhaled deeply, steadying herself. Not yet. She had to wait for the perfect moment. The conversation at the table buzzed on, chatter about work, politics, and the latest gossip in Igel Gardens. Kichi, Henry's elder sister, was in the middle of a dramatic retelling of how her neighbor's husband ran off with the maid when Lucy cleared her throat. The room fell silent. "I have something to say," Lucy announced, her voice calm, controlled. Henry stiffened beside her. Rachel shifted in her chair, eyes darting between Lucy and Henry. Lucy reached into her purse and pulled out a neatly folded document. With slow precision, she unfolded it and placed it on the table. "Divorce papers," she said, her tone light, almost casual. already prepared, waiting to be signed. A collective gasp rippled through the room. Nkichi's eyes widened. Henry's mother's fork clattered against her plate. Lucy let the silence stretch, then turned to Henry. "Would you like to explain why you were planning to divorce me without telling me?" Henry's mouth opened then closed. His fingers twitched beside his plate. "Nothing to say," Lucy tilted her head. "Typical. You've been silent for months, haven't you? Ignoring me, treating me like I was invisible, all while planning to throw me out like trash." Henry inhaled sharply. "Lucy, lower your voice." Lucy let out a bitter laugh. "Oh, now you want me to be quiet? You had no problem disrespecting me behind my back, but now you want to pretend to be decent." Rachel's fingers gripped the stem of her wine glass. Lucy's gaze shifted to her. "And you shameless, disgusting snake." Rachel blinked rapidly. "Lucy, what are you talking about?" Lucy leaned forward, her eyes burning with rage. "Oh, don't play dumb now, Rachel. Not after everything. My best friend, my sister. The person I trusted with my secrets. You were supposed to have my back, but instead you were spreading your legs for my husband." The room erupted in shocked gasps. Rachel's lips trembled. "Lucy, shut up," Lucy snapped. "Don't insult my intelligence with your pathetic lies. I saw you, I heard you, and worst of all, I trusted you. How long, Rachel? How long have you been stabbing me in the back while pretending to be my shoulder to cry on?" Rachel's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Lucy turned back to Henry. "And you? You are the most miserable excuse for a man I have ever laid eyes on. You let a woman manipulate you into hating your own wife. The same wife who stood by you, who loved you when you were nothing." Henry's jaw tightened. "Lucy, stop making a scene." "A scene?" Lucy scoffed. "Oh no, Henry. A scene is what you and Rachel have been making behind my back for God knows how long. A scene is what you were going to create when you threw me out of a home with nothing." Rachel's face had lost all its color. Lucy wasn't done. "Tell me something, Henry," she continued, her voice dripping with venom. "What exactly does Rachel have that I don't? Is it the desperation, the shamelessness, the lack of morals? Or maybe you enjoy the thrill of sneaking around like a common criminal?" Henry clenched his fists. "Lucy, enough." "Enough." Lucy's laugh was sharp, bitter. "Oh, I haven't even started. Do you know what disgusts me the most? You didn't even have the decency to own up to your betrayal. You were going to discard me like a used napkin while parading Rachel around like some prize. But let me tell you something, Henry, she is not a prize. She is a leftover, and the world will see her for exactly what she is." Rachel pushed back her chair violently. "You have no right to speak to me like that." Lucy's eyes blazed. "No right, no right. You slept with my husband, planned my downfall, and now you want to act like the victim? You are nothing but a cheap, man-stealing, backstabbing wretch. And guess what? You can have Henry. You can take this excuse of a man and rot together for all I care." Rachel's hands shook. "Lucy, please, please what?" Lucy snapped. "Please forgive you. Please let it go. You plotted against me, Rachel. You wanted me gone. Well, congratulations. I'm leaving. But don't think for a second that I'm leaving empty-handed." Her gaze fell back to Henry. "I'll see you in court. And I will make sure you pay for every single thing you've done." Rachel's breath hitched. "You can." "Oh, I can," Lucy cut in, "and I will. Because unlike you, I don't have to steal to get what I deserve." She picked up her purse, smoothing down her dress. Then, with one final glance at the two people who had betrayed her, she smiled. "Enjoy each other," she said sweetly. "You deserve the misery that's coming." And with that, she walked out, her heels clicking against the marble floor, leaving behind a room full of stunned faces and two people who would never know peace again. Lucy stepped out of the courthouse into the warm afternoon air of Udolu Estate, the weight on her chest finally lifting. The court ruling was done. The papers in her hands were proof of her victory, and Henry and Rachel had gotten exactly what they deserved. The months leading up to this moment had been long and painful. But now, standing under the vast sky, Lucy felt something she hadn't in a very long time: freedom. She glanced to the side where Henry stood, looking smaller than she had ever seen him. His shoulders slumped, his eyes dark with regret. Rachel was nowhere to be found. After her humiliating exposure, she had disappeared, unable to face the whispers and judgment of the people around her. Henry took a step forward. Lucy, wait. She turned to him, but there was no softness in her gaze, no lingering attachment. The man she had once loved was nothing more than a stranger to her now. Lucy, please, he tried again, running a frustrated hand through his hair. Can we at least talk? She let out a dry laugh, shaking her head. Talk? Now you want to talk? After plotting behind my back, humiliating me, and treating me like garbage, now you have something to say? Henry's lips parted, but no words came out. He knew he had lost the right to explanations. Lucy took a step closer, lowering her voice just enough for only him to hear. You were my husband. I gave you my love, my loyalty, and my trust. And what did you do with it? You threw it away for a cheap thrill with my best friend. Henry flinched, guilt flashing across his face. You let Rachel poison your mind against me, Lucy continued, her voice unwavering. You let her turn you into a weak, spineless man who thought he could walk all over me. She let out a bitter chuckle. And look where that got you. Henry swallowed hard. Lucy, I swear if I could take it back, But you can't take it back, Henry, she cut in, tilting her head. You made your choice, and now you get to live with it. She glanced down at the legal documents in her hands, a satisfied smirk playing on her lips. You fought so hard to push me out of your life, but now you're the one left with nothing. No money, no home, no dignity. Henry's hands balled into fists, his jaw clenching. He wanted to argue, to fight back, but he had nothing left. Lucy turned away. Goodbye, Henry. She walked past him without a second glance, stepping toward her car where Nkichi stood waiting. That evening, Lucy sat at the Haven Lounge, sipping a glass of chilled orange juice, letting the taste linger on her tongue. The world outside buzzed with life, but inside she felt at peace. Across from her, Nkichi stirred her drink thoughtfully. You handled that well, she said, watching Lucy with a hint of admiration. Lucy exhaled, leaning back in her chair. I don't know if it was well, but it's over. Kichi nodded. Rachel thought she could win, but she lost everything. She was fired from her job this morning. Turns out, employers don't like hiring people with reputations as husband snatchers. Lucy arched a brow. Karma is efficient, I see. I smirked. And Henry broke. Struggling. Some of his friends won't even associate with him anymore after what he did to you. Lucy remained silent for a moment, letting the information sink in. A few months ago, she might have found some twisted satisfaction in their downfall. But now she realized she didn't care. Not anymore. I spent so long thinking I needed to fix things, Lucy admitted, her voice quieter now. That maybe if I just tried harder, Henry would love me again. That Rachel would always have my back. Nkichi reached across the table, placing a reassuring hand on hers. But now, Lucy smiled, a real, genuine smile. I finally see that I never needed them. I was always enough, Nkichi grinned. You were, and you are. Lucy raised her glass. To new beginnings, Nkichi lifted hers as well. To your new beginning. They clinked glasses, and as Lucy took a sip, she realized that for the first time in a long time, she wasn't just existing. She was living, and she would never let anyone take that from her again. We've come to the end of this story. Please subscribe to my channel to support me. Thank you.